A lot of what happened is after 1972, the Department of Indian Affairs went around to our Aboriginal communities and said, well, it looks like you guys won your fight with the government of Canada. The Indian Act is no longer going to be wiped out according to the white paper policy. So that was with the help of the Canadian people, the Canadian media, and lobbying the Canadian government to rescind the white paper policy. But the fallout was that Aboriginal First Nations communities ended up with government agents, Indian agents, coming to our First Nations communities. I was just elected a councillor in 1970 in my own community of Elsipogtog, and Indian Affairs came in with a big checkbook saying, here's your money to administer your housing, here's your money to administer your welfare, and here's your money to administer your education. And all they did was the monies that they had used traditionally in government and literally just transferred them to First Nations communities, and they didn't make accommodation that one administration was looking after so many members, and then they were distributing it to 8 or 13 First Nations communities, and there is sort of like administrative fees that are attached to each time they subdivided that money. And so they didn't allow for Nations communities to develop culturally relevant curriculums for Indigenous students. And one of the biggest problems and issues were that the children were learning an education system that was not including knowledge or information about their own culture and their own communities. I grew up in a First Nations community, and I went to an Indian day school in Big Cove, New Brunswick, and Eleanor said they didn't beat those children. Well, they beat me because I used my left hand, and every time I used my left hand to write something on the chalkboard, I received a ruler in my hand. Every time we spoke our language, we got the strap, and it was no different than residential schools. I must say that because I know Eleanor, she's younger than I am, a lot younger than I am, and I'm sorry she's not here. But anyway, I know that there was a similar program in our First Nations communities. But when the transfer came, that was the difficulty that our people faced, and it wasn't until 10 years later that, or maybe even almost 20 years later, that the Education Authority, where Eleanor works, was created to help transfer those programs and services from the federal government to our actual First Nations communities, and I think they've been doing an amazing job despite the funding conundrums that they've been facing.